Good morning. Thanks for everybody coming out here this morning. I want to talk to my story. Starts back in 2007. I guess as an opener, started doing Mung Chan. Asked me to add a little piece that I one time talked about at Airmen Leadership School. That I guess sits with them that kind of captured some of the students there. And it's only one time I talked about it. And the reason I only talked about it one time is something that's very hard for me to talk about, because of trauma that I talked about at a VA center. Me and my team, I was embedded with the 3rd Division Marines over in Afghanistan, and we were out in a place called Camp Joyce, or Forward Operating Base Joyce, and we were on a 2-day op. What we did at that time, the Marines would switch out every 7 months, and they had just switched out teams, so we were out there, and instead of them coming all the way out towards Kabul with all their vehicles that were broke, we would take a team out and fix anything they needed fixed, like weapons, vehicles, and we would grab somebody from the Army from Camp Phoenix and go out there and get everything taken care of. While we were out there, we were close to Asadabad, if anybody's familiar with the area, and it's about 6 clicks or 6 miles between a mountain range where Asadabad is, and we were at Camp Joyce, and there was a large operation going on at Asadabad where they were trying to hit enemy insurgents and large air operations. So the first night, we thought it was kind of cool. We were sitting over at Camp Joyce after a long day's work of working on all kinds of things, just sitting there with MVGs, watching them just bomb the heck out of everything there. I mean, they were sending everything from Bagram, blowing stuff up. Asadabad was hitting stuff with indirect fire. And we were watching with the MVGs as they were blowing the heck out of this mountainside while we were over on this other mountain range at the edge of it. And many times I had been out there, we were hit from the mountain range we were on because we were so close to Pakistan. But we felt pretty safe since they were hitting all this stuff. Now the next night, the new warrant officer from the Marines came to us, and we had kind of settled in, and we were actually playing poker, and it was kind of towards the end of my tour, so if anybody's done a long tour, you start to feel kind of invincible towards the end. Not a good thing to do. But he came to us and he let us know, he had this kind of almost looked like a ghost. He let us know that he's being told that about 120 plus enemy insurgent force was headed directly our way. They had, I guess, taken enough of a pounding that a large force had broken off from that mountainside and had knocked out a Afghan National Police post on their way to us. And the way the valley worked, we were kind of in that route, set up purposefully, and they were on their way to us. Because of all the air support to the main operation, we would not be given air support. When I'm talking about a forward operating base, it's probably the place we were at is about the size of the med group compound. Just HESCO barriers, and then our operating guns was just what we put on top of our Humvees. We had about a 16-man force against what we figured 120, and they said 120, upwards of 120 to 200 enemy fighters. They didn't exactly know. When they got to a certain point, we were actually able to start calling in some indirect fire from Asadabad fire base. But during that period, we were getting everything ready we could on our east side of our camp. Normally, we were attacked from our west side of our camp. So setting up our defense was very tricky, and we were really scrambling. I don't know if any of you have ever seen on the news small encampments like that, where we were at in that type of location, knowing that we would not be able to get any type of support for many hours. Some of them had been in some huge firefights, and some had been overrun. Some bad thoughts ran through our mind, and some of us started talking to each other to what to do if we got down to the last person. So, what got me to that point? Well, I grew up in a small town in Chautauqua, Wisconsin. I was on a dairy farm, and some point in high school, I guess, I became a teen dad. So I really needed a job, and I wanted to go in the Marines. A lot of my family was either in the Marines or in the Army, and I wanted to go in the Marines. That was like the toughest thing. I knew a lot of my family, so I had an uncle that was a Marine sniper, and I was like, I just want to be in the Marines. I was not 18 at the time, though, and my parents were like, no way, that's a decision you have to make. So I wasn't going in the Marines. So I worked a bunch of odd jobs until I finally turned 18, and I had enough of it. I had worked so many different places, and I finally went up, and the very first recruiter, and the only one that was in it at the time, was an Air Force recruiter, and I signed up. The Air Force saw fit to make me a vehicle mechanic. I worked as a vehicle mechanic for quite some time, and in 2001, I ended up getting PCS'd over to a place called Incirlik Air Force Base. I got sent over there because supposedly the Air Force was doing this realignment, and there was too many Air Force mechanics over in Seymour Johnson and not enough over at Tinker. When I got to Tinker, there was too many Air Force mechanics, and there was this other group called a 3rd Combat Comm Group, and they had a little area that they did all this little fun stuff, basically ground pounding some stuff with weapons and all kinds of neat training, digging foxholes and teaching people how to do fire team movements, squad team movements. So I wanted part of that. I got to go through their combat comm readiness school, and when I did such a good job, they said, hey, we have an instructor position open. They talked to our chief and my functional, and for the next 2.5 years after I got additional training, I got to be a combat instructor. I got to teach people on escape and evasion and fire team movements, squad team movements, and I just loved it, except for all the ticks and poison ivy and all the other stuff. After 9/11, I really wanted to get in the fight, but all our leadership kept telling me and the other instructors it was our job to make sure all these people were trained up so they came back alive. I guess one of my success stories was everybody that went to Iraq and Afghanistan and everything, all the different things, they were making it back. Their jobs was to go to a Air Base, set everything up so mainly spec ops guys could come into where there was nowhere to land, do their operations, and I was very proud of that. Eventually, the Air Force did something that they had not done since Vietnam, and they took on a request for forces for the Army, and they started doing convoy ops. They tasked vehicle operations and vehicle maintenance with that job, and I jumped right on board because we still had extra people, and my time of being out in my career field was coming up, so I jumped right on that, and I went off to Camp Bullis for 2 months. Went to 2 months of training down in Camp Bullis, Texas, and off I went to Iraq. We were the 2nd surge. The 1st surge was some Air Force Guard guys. I feel bad for them because they kind of just got some training, got whipped over to Iraq and thrown in a bunch of trucks that weren't really armored up. We had the hillbilly armor. When I was there, I was still cutting armor and welding it onto trucks as we did convoy operations. I was trained on every heavy weapon there was, from the 50 cal to the 240 and Mark 19, and we did convoy operations all over, all main supply routes all over Iraq and I did 9 months. I did a 9-month tour. Seen plenty of action while I was in Iraq, operating out of Camp Spiker. And once again, when I came back, because I didn't get killed, I felt invincible, but I really didn't know what to do, except for the fact that I just didn't feel like I was doing enough. As I watched TV, I seen people, men and women, dying, and I knew with the training that I had, I was in the wrong place. It was my fault. I needed to be back there because they were dying because I wasn't there. I began drinking. When I came back, the Air Force at that time, unlike the Army and some others, is basically a post-deployment analysis. Is I did my stuff on a computer. And then 60 days later, I was having a lot of nightmares and stuff from a lot of the stuff I saw over there. If somebody died in the unit or anything happened, or you saw death or any type of firefights or anything happen, IEDs, you basically just kept pressing on. But once again, 60 days later, I got an email and I filled out a post-deployment thing. Obviously, all that stuff has changed and the Air Force is caught up and doing a much better job. I was kind of, I'd say, pissed off at the Air Force about the way that was done. so I didn't feel like talking to anybody. So I did the wrong thing, and I holed up. I shut myself off from my family. One good thing I guess the Air Force got is I just worked really hard because I didn't want to deal with anything with anybody. I just worked hard, and I started thinking of how I could get back over to the fight. The only thing that held me up was Katrina. Katrina came in, and I ended up doing convoy operations for that because the 3rd Herd had all kinds of vehicles to do convoy operations. So as soon as I was done with that, I seen a little thing come up on the computer that I could volunteer to do a year to Afghanistan. I convinced my family that I needed to go to Afghanistan so we could stay at Tinker longer and be stable, and we'd have more money, and we could get out of the apartment that we were in, and we could build a house. No matter what they said, I heard them saying yes. Later on, I found out that they were basically telling me whatever decision I made, I was going to do whatever I wanted. Probably the only good thing about me going to Afghanistan is they got me away from the bottle. 2 more months of training, I went over to Camp Shelby and Mississippi, did some more training. This time it was much more realistic, actually working with Iraqis and people from Afghanistan. And this time a lot more live fire, kicking in doors and stuff with learning how to figure out how to detect IEDs, and went off to Afghanistan. When we got to Afghanistan, found out that the original request for forces had been shut off, so they didn't really know what to do with us when we got to Camp Phoenix in Afghanistan. But they asked if any of us had some heavy combat experience. The major that was our commander for that time knew that me and a couple of the captains that were prior enlisted had done a lot of extra stuff, so he let them know who we were, and they assigned us over to the 3rd Division Marines over at Camp Black Horse. So for the next year, I operated with the 3rd Division Marines. We trained Afghan soldiers on everything, on how to keep their beds in their barracks nice and clean, to how to clean their weapons, how to do patrols, how to drive vehicles. A lot of them didn't know how to drive, how to fix those vehicles. And really when I first got there, we did everything, all the logistic hauls, and towards the end, they were hauling the stuff and we were pulling the security. So I was actually really proud. It was very scary at first. Obviously, anytime something would happen, we were always worried, are they going to support us in a firefight? And I was very proud to say, anytime something happened, the hardest part was gathering them back in so they wouldn't go too far during a fight. And they always wanted to go after the enemy. We would have to get them to pull back during an ambush or anything and let them know that sometimes you just push through. So I was always very proud of my Afghan soldiers. Anytime we lost somebody from either the Sec 4 that was there from the 45th Infantry Division, from the Army, or any other unit, it was just business as usual. You never had time to do any mourning. You just, next operation. Right towards my end, we had 2 guys that we lost that were within 2 weeks of leaving. It was just like every day, us meeting, walking in here or walking past each other, going to the dining facility. I had to go pull guard duty as they removed the bodies, and then sat there, and the person that had shot them, and I sat there and watched that person bleed out. During that time, every one of us were just angry at this person that had killed them. All those have lasting effects. And when I got back, I just didn't know how to deal with any of that stuff. Same thing when I rolled back from Afghanistan, I did the computer analysis. When I got back, my unit didn't really have a job for me, so they asked me to fill in as a first sergeant. And I was like, sure. I didn't really even take all my time off because I just wanted to just start doing something. I just was confused and I didn't know what to do. So I just started working. My family was not too happy with that decision, but I didn't really care. Not a very good thing to say, I'm sure. So I started working. I just dove right into work. Everybody at work thought I was great. Eventually, they asked me to actually fill in as take the first sergeant job because I was doing such a good job and the Air Force needed first sergeants. At that time, I wasn't getting heavy into the drinking, but the nightmares were kicking up pretty heavy. And I had pretty much shut myself off from my family. I would come home from work after working late and just go into our little TV room that we had at our nice new house and do nothing with my family. On weekends, I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't want to be around crowds. I'd become angry. I'd do stupid things like my then wife. If she didn't stop at the line at the stop sign, I'd get pissed off. If she was driving too close to the car in front of her, I'd freaking go in a fit of rage. Just things, I'd get angry about the stupidest things. So I really started to take things out on my family. My friends would get on me and ask why I'd never want to go out. And I just didn't understand what was going on. But to me, I still had my Air Force, and that's all that mattered to me was my airmen. So I became a first sergeant, and the big thing was, I told my family, is they're going to make me a first sergeant, they're going to put me in a unit that's not going to deploy, and that's what they had told me. I came back, and they put me in a unit that deployed, so right away I deployed. So I went on my deployment, I came back, and my wife was gone. She said she had enough. After a while, we ended up getting back together. That ended up not working out, but so that just made things rougher. I ended up getting PCS'd over here, and it was like a fresh start. I got over here, and it was great. I had gotten some therapy while I was at Tinker, but when I got here, it was just like nobody knew what I had gone through, so it was like I had this clean slate, and I could just get into work. Shoot, I got like #1 senior NCO of the base, and I was into every project. I was helping out airmen, doing all kinds of things, working my butt off. I just loved it. But things started coming back real heavy. I started having a real hard time, and I really didn't know what to do. The command chief at that time saw that I had done a lot of time with the Marines and said, hey, instead of going to the Air Force Senior NCO Academy, you want to go to the Marine one. I was like, heck yeah. So when I went to the Marine Staff NCO Academy, I met a guy that actually replaced me when I was in Afghanistan. From that point on, I'm not going to lie, there was not a night I was sober. Anytime we got released from class, I think we probably drank the rest of the time as soon as we were released from class. Probably showed up to class a lot of times drunk. Let's be honest. I got back. Anytime I could, I gave up the phone so I could drink. I drank so I could go to sleep. I'd wake up with violent nightmares because all the stuff we talked about that just pushed all this stuff up, and I'd drink to try to go back to sleep. Problem is when during the day I started to see stuff, and no matter how much I drank, it didn't go away. And part of my breaking point was when my 13-year-old daughter was sitting across from me, and she saw me, and I just felt broken. So I went and talked to my counselor, and she had been talking to me about going to a place called North Chicago. So I said, okay, we're going to have to do this. And she got me with a consult with them, and she messed up, and she let me know that it was not involuntary, that it was voluntary. And I started figuring out, hey, I can get out of this. So I stabilized for just a little bit. And lucky for me, there was 2 senior NCOs, Sergeant Smith, one of them sitting over here, and Senior Master Sergeant Schrader. I guess they kind of knew what was going on because it was probably obvious. One, I'm not a smoker, and I was bumming cigarettes from Sergeant Smith during the day. I was walking back one day towards my office when I was the MXS First Sergeant, and they both kind of grabbed me and kind of gave me a hard talk. I felt it was. And what they didn't realize was I was planning on trying to figure out how to get out of it. Because in my mind, I was like, who's going to take care of my airmen while I'm gone? Well, Master Sergeant Stamper took care of my airmen while I was gone and did a great job. But at that point, I was thinking of excuses. of why I didn't want to go, because I didn't want to face my demons. I was scared. Maybe I didn't want to get away from the bottle. But I could not see any hope at the end of the tunnel. I was in such darkness. After going to the VA clinic and learning most of the stuff I learned, I truly believe I wouldn't be up here today without those 2 senior NCOs. Because I was done. Since I've come back, I've had some struggles. I stayed dry for 7 months. One good thing I do is Sergeant Dylan Mungchan and his staff have asked me to come to like every Airmen Leadership School and class, and I'll talk about combat stress. One of my counselors I had was Major Tansley. We talked about my traumas. It was a good thing. It's very hard for me to talk about this stuff, but what I see is it's helped some people come forward. To me, letting people know that I had all these problems, I felt like everybody's going to see I'm weak. But after a while, it seemed like people that saw it were able to come and talk to me or go get help. So I got to a point where I didn't really care if people thought I was weak. I'd rather somebody went and got help. And I knew that there was people that saw where I was at and probably should have done more. So what I try to do is, when I talk to people about it, is if you see somebody that's going through things, if you're that supervisor, go grab them and tell them to get help. Because you don't know where they're at or how far gone they might be. If you're that person, don't feel weak, because there's others like you. So go get help. That's my story.